Hello and welcome to Varn blog. Solo. There's only me today. I'm going to answer a question just like I did with decadence about socialist accountability. And I'm saying socialist accountability as opposed to leftist accountability because I don't speak to all leftists. I don't care to speak to all leftists. It's not that I want to kick anyone out. I don't want to police what left and what's Marxist. I think that's a futile gesture that you will almost always lose in the great tide of history. I just think what I'm talking about is what people involved in socialist organizing, generally around unions, should be doing as a minimum of accountability. So I'm going to read the question and I'm going to comment on all of it. IN or H Rude, or I have no idea. That's a INH Rude 9584 says, I'd like to suggest a topic for a future Varn vlog. In several of your Varn vlog solos, you have said the left, in quotation marks, and I do appreciate the quotation marks, needs to take responsibility for itself. In fact, although your channel generally avoids calls to action, this might be the single exception. And I have my own thoughts about what this means and how to do it, but I would benefit from a more analytical gloss. What does it mean to take responsibility for yourself as an individual political actor? What does it mean to hold others accountable, not just for their sex scandals, but also for their failures? What are the emotional dispositions of someone who takes responsibility? More importantly, what are the concrete practices, processes, and principles involved in taking responsibility on an individual organizational level? Thank you for your work here. It helps me think clearly about my own principles. You know, this is something that I really should talk more about. We're going to work in concentric circles here. We're going to start with yourself. Do you have an ethical standard to which you comport yourself in dealing with both outsiders and insiders? Are they consistent? Right? Do you treat certain people certain ways regardless? Right? I talk to conservatives all the time. I know it doesn't seem like it here because I'm not interested in tailing their talking points or talking about where they're right. This is a polemical space. But I acknowledge legitimate complaints, critiques, or whatever from my opponents. When they're right, they're right. Now, there are normative claims between us and them that are never going to be copacetic. But that does not mean that I cannot admit where legit grievances come from, particularly because people are taking advantage of, and people usually being people with a lot of money and power, on negative partisanship between people who are relatively low power in their social world. You know, it's not like the average conservative, even when they're petite bourgeois, is actually, you know, has the pull of an Elon Musk or a Peter Thiel or any of the Kochs or a Mercer or, you know, even the old Berkshires. You know, this is a different level of engagement. You need to hold yourself also accountable to what you say. Do you live by what you say? Are there points where you cut people out? I don't mean deplatform them. I'm not talking about trying to destroy their access to the world. I think a lot of that's futile and creates backdoor channels. Usually have knock-on effects that you don't see till way later. If you don't believe me, look at what happened with deplatforming all those people from Twitter. When they came back, they were more violent and worse. All right, because they've been practicing alone and developing their own parallel universe the entire time. I also don't think you should shrink from all that just because it's more pleasant. All right. I'm not saying you need to, you know, fight the good fight on Twitter, because I don't think Twitter is really a public space. I'm not going to blame anyone for choosing not to opt into or out of that. But notice I'm also saying I'm not going to blame anyone for not opting out of that either, because it is a space of media contention, one with a lot more right-wing hellscape now, but it's still a real one. I mean, honestly, I don't get that much contention on Bluesky either, but Bluesky liberals mostly ignore me. Not always, but most of the time. All right. I'm not always a pleasant person. I do not mean having a pleasant disposition as one of the things that holds people accountable. But do I do what I say? And if I don't do what I say, do I try to make amends for it? It's hard to trust someone in solidarity work if they are not trustworthy in general. Period. End of discussion. Your ethos, the way you project yourself to the world, really matters. And so I don't mean, do you wear a nice suit? Do you dress like a normal person? I know there's a lot of stuff where you'll have people mock other people for the way they dress in public. In public, I actually dress fairly drab. I'm usually in a gray t-shirt and work pants. Or when I'm at work, I'm in a button down. I have longish hair now, but that's just because I've decided to grow it out for personal reasons that are symbolic to me. But in general, I've always tried to look relatively middle of the road with the occasional wry t-shirt, and that's been the way it's been. The reason for that is that I want to be perceived as a relatively safe person in most spaces. And if I am perceived as unsafe, I want that to be deliberate. I want to be in control of that. All right. Now, I don't care about people with, dyeing their hair blue. I used to dye my hair bright red when I was, in fact, I've had it blue too. I don't make judgments about that kind of thing. I'm not here to like fight female baristas through some grudge I have because I lost a date once when I was 19. That's not really what we're doing here. Nor would I tell people that they need to dress a certain way all the time. You need to figure out what's going to appeal to the audience you're speaking to. Be as authentic to yourself as you can while doing that. Don't wear something you'd never wear. It will look like a costume. And move accordingly. You are accountable to a group. What you are doing is not just your personal expression for yourself. It is your personal expression to that group and how you intend to interact with them. You should signal that. All right. And the way you dress. Are you taking the scenario seriously or not? Are you overdressing? Are you trying to lord over people in your originality or in the strangeness of your dress or in the richness of your dress, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? There's all kinds of things you're going to signify by what you're wearing, by how you're interacting, how you're speaking. Do you show proper respect? Do you try to respect the norms of the situation? So, are you an individual actor willing to both be authentic to yourself, but also signal that you understand the situation to those you are being in dialogue and solidarity with? Or just in dialogue with, not just in solidarity with, because sometimes you need to be able to move in circles you're not going to be in solidarity with. Do you make promises that are deliverable? You talk about how I don't make calls to action on my show because a lot of the calls to actions don't mean much. I don't think they're going to do what people think they're going to do in the 10. I have a diffuse audience. Several thousand people will see this or listen to it, but they're divided all over the world. I have a large audience in Seattle. I have a large audience in the various boroughs of New York. I have a large audience in Ontario. I have a large audience in England, which baffles me. But I do. My responsibility, however, here is going to be different because I'm not going to be able to act politically in all those areas. You can take what I do and use it, but that's not what it means. I also think it is important to admit when I was wrong or when I misgauged something. I think that's the first thing an honest political actor needs to do. I do not think that they should have to step down every time they make a mistake, morally or otherwise. But I do think it means if I make a prediction and it fails, I should own that. If I misjudge the situation, seriousness, I should own that too. Now, I think that also implies that other people should have charity to what I'm saying and try to adjust with that and not treat it as some mass parasocial competition. But let's be fair. We know that's going to happen. That's the nature of the medium. If I lose a bunch of sleep about that, then I am acting like a child. Then you ask, what does it mean to hold leaders accountable? Why do you continuously platform people who say the same things that cause them to lose? That's the first question. And have they owned up to why they lost, or have they blamed their enemies for everything? Why didn't they see what their enemies were going to do? First question. I know it's a hard question, but why didn't Dilma Rousseff see what the Brazilian right was going to do? And how that ended up for Lula. Why didn't Corbyn understand the nature of the Labour Party's power base? Maybe he did. Then do we hold him accountable for what he promised? Was it possible? Et cetera, et cetera. This does not mean, however, you automatically disown all of these people automatically. Now, in the United States, I think the state of the Democratic Party means we shouldn't work with them on the national level, and definitely shouldn't work with them on anything involving the executive branch. That's my own personal opinion, because we have been burnt by that so many times that it is an irrational gambit at this point. Now, I also have dogmatic and historical reasons for believing that, but let's just set those aside. We've seen this left-wing rush for the executive fail, even if we assumed that the leaders are well-meaning, and maybe we shouldn't assume that. It's still dumb to push the same person back out over and over again. And yes, I'm talking about Bernie Sanders. All right. Is there a real accounting to why Bernie Sanders both failed and capitulated to the Democrats from Bernie himself? That's what you should demand. All right. The emotional dispositions of someone who takes responsibility is actually probably fairly taciturn. I think compassion is great. I think you should treat people kindly. I also think big, spectacular displays of mea culpa are usually suspect. Can you admit what you did or didn't do relative to the situation? Can you take accounting for why you think it failed and your role in it? It cannot just be that everything else happened to you. Because if nothing else, you made the decision to try to do an attack that you were going to lose. And that needs to be accounted for. What did you think? What were you wrong about? Et cetera, et cetera. And you should demand that of your politicians too. So it should be introspective, but not totally solipsistically so. It should be taciturn. By that I mean, relatively stoical. I'm not saying that you should be a stoic. I also think righteous anger has a place in all of this. What are the concrete practices? Well, people should be able to reintegrate themselves, but that they should have to prove something to do it. All right. They should there is a way in which, yes, you should always be able to come back. Well, not always. There are things you probably shouldn't be able to come back from. Betraying your comrades in a way that costs a life, I don't think you can come back from. But in general, there should be always a way to be reintegrated, but it should require proof that you've self-criticized, for lack of a better term, and I don't mean in the spectacular way. You can use self-criticism in this way to like justify all kinds of ineffective organizing and situations. But I mean, are you going to answer the questions about what faults you played? Is there a way for you to be monitored as you get brought back in? What are the conditions under which you are re-accepted or not? And a principle of charity should be always given to those who failed versus those who betrayed. Now, while I get frustrated that the left is always valorizing failures, I do not think we should like deplatform these people and kick them out. In fact, I don't know that we should. There's people I won't have on my show because I don't entirely trust them to tell me the truth. But I'm not one big on deplatforming. I don't think it really works. People find alternate platforms. You create whole new media niches. People come back. You know. But I'm also not saying you need to have everyone on your show. It needs to be open, free for all. And you should just let everyone say whatever the fuck they want. Neither one of those things is necessarily the right way to go about this. So when you take responsibility, one principle should be for yourself. If you're the person taking responsibility, I'm going to do X to reassure this, or I'm going to try to learn from X mistake. I'm going to try to illustrate that to you in concrete ways, which I will tell you. If I continue to mess up, I should focus on things where I don't mess up as much. And by mess up here, I'm not assuming like a moral failing. I'm assuming like I'm wrong about the situation in multiple ways. If I misgauge the situation and I'm constantly doing on certain things, then it is responsible to remove yourself from commentary on those things. You will notice that when I think I have been wrong about something, I will not pontificate on it beyond the fact I thought it was wrong in the past a super lot, because why should you trust my judgment on that thing? I've admitted my error. I've tried to learn from it. I'm not saying I'm going to self-censor around this issue, but it is important that I realize that maybe I have a blindness that I did not see. And then I limit myself to things where I feel stronger, better, more willing to learn. When it comes to things like what are principles for taking responsibility for the individual and the organizational level, you should always acknowledge when you've lost in a political fight, particularly when you got outvoted. And you should either, if you really cannot in good conscience stay in the organization, you should leave it. Like, that's the honorable thing to do. Or you should focus on trying to win over people to your cause under the next fight while fighting for the directives of the organization you're in while you're in it. So, for example, in my union, there's been many a voting round that I lost when I was a rep. I did not try to say that the union was illegitimate because my position was defeated. I continued to work with the union. I continue to advocate for my position within it, but I did not disobey orders regarding the actual democratic results of a vote. I followed the vote. All right. One of the reasons I don't join that many organizations is because I actually do think that's something you should do. I don't necessarily mean you should never critique your own organization or you should never make those critiques public. But I do think if you make a critique public, you should still be willing to admit that this was what the organization decided and goes with it. And you have to make the call on whether or not you stay. And if you feel the need to publicly critique a grouping, you should probably also consider whether or not you can stay in it once you do so. That is acting with integrity in response to those kind of situations. Organizations should have recall. They should have recall for people who screw up. Those recall rules should be there. They should be fairly robust, meaning they shouldn't just be a simple majority, so they can't happen all the time, but they need to be able to happen on any situation. The idea that you have unaccountable leadership in socialist groups is a bad model for the future, and you should mirror that model. So you should encourage the ability to remove or recall people who are not able to fulfill their roles, but that should be done in a democratic way with arguments presented and people being able to face their accusers and deal with the situation. And that's always going to be hostile and awkward, but you should be able to handle that. This is what this taciturn thing is about. All right. So yeah. So all these things are playable. I mean, you can have bad actors take advantage of them, but it's more important that you have them than not. Now, some of the things about how you particularly structure an organization, there are things I can tell you not to do. Slate voting's a bad idea. Weighted voting's a bad idea. If you're Democratic, be Democratic. Otherwise, don't be. Don't claim to be either. You should have clear principles and goals for the group. What is it going to be? It should be fairly concrete. In political groups, that should be a political program. In union organization, that should be particular union goals, coordination goals, educational goals. Those things need to be stated ahead of time so that you can actually hold people accountable to them. It's hard to hold people accountable to things that aren't unstated and unsaid. All right. And you should try to act in a way in which when you have to make a principled decision, you do not have to betray people beyond the results of that decision. And that means limiting what you do and how you do things to things that are actionable within your sphere. Now, I do not think this sufficiently answers your question. But I think socialist accountability is one. Am I acting with integrity to both my position that I have assumed and responsibility? And am I treating people equally? Do I treat people with a standard of morality that is applied across the board? Or is there a mere friend-enemy distinction set up in a nearly arbitrary way? If I disagree with my organization, have I stated why and how and what ways? But am I still willing to work with that organization for its goals if I have lost legitimately, or do I need to leave? If I need to leave, I should leave. Am I willing to admit where I made a mistake in understanding or action? Can I take accountability for those mistakes? Is there a way for me to prove that I am sincere and how to reintegrate with the group if I want to? And have I made restitution to those I've harmed if I harmed anyone by direct and deliberate action? Now, also, are we as organizations putting people up because of their fame or because of their efficiency? Being famous is not the same thing as being successful or having leverage. Go ask the unions for that, honestly. Unions are very popular right now, but the other two things have not so much happened. Do I abide by the rules of the organization if I've had a say in those rules? So do I hold myself accountable to things I've agreed to knowingly and actively? And am I honest in my dealings and my promises? It is better not to make a promise that you cannot keep than to make a promise falsely. I hope this helps you. This is just the beginning. I'm going to be thinking about this question for a while, so there might be following socialist accountability videos in the future where I kind of flesh this out more. Thank you so much for asking, though, because this is the kind of thing it's important to get down. These behaviors and stuff are super important. for establishing not just your credibility, but the solidarity that you are showing and is shown to you can be reciprocated and held in trust. That's important. Protect your peace.